Look at that.
Hey.
Hey, hey, hey.
Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have you back here with us for another episode of Wellness Foreplay.
We are Dr. Dondi and Marcy Nettles.
Hi,
we
guys.
are your podcast hosts today, and we are excited to be here because we're going to be talking about what makes you you today.
Yeah, we're so excited about it. So remember, we went over the 7 areas of mastery for you to have your optimal wellness overall. And so today we're going to be focusing on one of those bottom foundation things. We're going to go back to the beginning. How did you get your start, basically? But, you know, I'm a former police detective, and you?
I'm a former family wellness chiropractor.
And we decided that bringing our skills together and doing the investigations, we would be able to come up with some knowledge that could potentially be the foreplay to your best self in your wellness journey. So today we are actually on episode number 25. Woohoo! That's
so
a
cool.
Big deal. That's a
Quarter
really
century
big deal.
mark.
Yeah, so episode number 25. We are actually going to be talking about genetics and your genes today. So that is the topic, is genetics and your genes. So the way that we do these podcasts or these live videos on Facebook is we have one topic each episode, and then we address 4 specific questions for that topic. So we have 4 questions for today. So if you are ready to see what those questions are, first let's go in here. So first, we've got what is genetics is question number 1. Question number 2 is, how are your genetics determined? Question number 3, what do your genetics tell you? And now question number 4, I love question number 4. It's, are you bound by your genetics, or can they be influenced? I love that question, by the way. So let's hop right in with question number 1, okay? So question number 1 is, what is genetics? What is it? I don't know. It's a study of something. What's it the study
of your genes.
Of your genes. Okay, so what it says here is, it says genetics is the study of genes and the variation of characteristics that are influenced by genes, including your physical and psychological characteristics, okay? So basically, all of our human traits, the things that you're born with, maybe color of your eyes, color of your hair, maybe how tall you are, maybe even how wide you may become.
Or how tall you're not.
Maybe some personality stuff, like, are you a happy person? Naturally. Are you a positive thinking person? Naturally. Or are you an introvert or an extrovert? All of that can have something to do with genes, right? But genetics is basically the study of genes. So that was a really easy question number 1. Do you have anything you want to add into that? I mean,
just the simplicity of it. It's literally the basic physical and functional characteristics of your heredity and where it comes from.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah. Try to keep it simple, right? The simpler it is, the easier it is to understand, and the easier it is to implement in your life and gain knowledge from.
You know, and that's exactly what this is all about, guys. This is not, we're not coming to you to tell you exactly what you should do, and this is 100% everything that you have to drop everything else and do right now. We want to just give you some information to think about, maybe to consider implementing 1 or 2 things, because, guys, knowledge is really, really important. But if you don't do anything with it, you're not going to get any results, at least positive results. You can't get negative ones if you don't do anything with the knowledge that you gain. So let's go ahead and hop on down to question number 2. How are your genetics determined? Or how is your genes? Where's your gene pool come from?
Sexy time.
Did you just say that?
That's right. That's where it comes from.
What is sexy time?
Sexy time is what happens. How we all got here.
Okay, so basically, guys, sexy time is when your mom and your dad came together and you were created.
That's right.
Because your genes, it's all hashtag your parents' fault.
That's right.
I mean, seriously. So basically, it's through the genes that came from your mom and dad. That's how you came to be. And that's where the study of you would start, right? Is through genetics. So let me read the basics on what genes are, and then you can help us break it down even better. So a gene is the basic unit through which genetic information is stored and passed between generations. So remember, mom and dad, and then you. Physically, a gene is a specific section of one of the long double helix-shaped DNA molecules that appear in each cell of the body. So it takes a lot of these different helixes. Sorry. Thank you for correcting me on that. I don't know it all. I'm just sharing with you what I think I know.
Felix rhymes,
and I hope that it helps.
It's okay.
But I just hope that, I just want you to know that me being the person that I'm kind of a regular, normal person. I don't have all the doctor speak and all of the understanding like Don D does. And so for me to bring my side of things, I hope it connects a little bit more with some of you where with Don D, it's like we're all learning from him, right? And I'm just kind of the sideshow. I bring the giggles and the silliness sometimes.
You need to keep it real. That's important.
I try to. So then I just read this like total science geeked out thing. How can you help us break it down a little bit better about what a gene really is?
Try to make it simple with a visual. So everyone knows what a ladder looks like, where you've got the two sides of the ladder and you've got the rungs that go in between. So imagine that that's really, really, really long ladder. And you grab both ends and you twist it. That's what it called when Marcy said double helix. It's like a ladder that's just being twisted, like you see like a piece of licorice. We've all seen a piece of licorice that kind of it twists as it goes down, right? Imagine that a ladder does that. So that's the basic fundamental of the helix. Now, why is it called a double helix? Because if you imagine now that ladder reference again, imagine taking a saw and cutting each individual rung in half, going all the way from one end of the ladder to the other and cutting it in half through the rungs. One half came from your mom, one half came from your dad. So in fact, when I'm gonna kind of go a little geeky into, if any of you ever took biology, human biology specifically, we learned about what are called cell division. So if it's regular cell division, it goes through what is the process called mitosis. When you're talking about sex cells, so the sperm and the egg, they go through what is called meiosis, because each one of them individually is what's called a gamete. It's Gamete. So your mom has a gamete, your dad had a gamete. And when the sperm and egg came together, the two gametes, which is half of your genetic structure, so half of those, so every piece of DNA comes from 23 paired or matched chromosomes. It's where the 23andMe comes in, if you're familiar with that company. Or it's kind of like Ancestry.com, where you send either saliva or blood and they give you your genetic profile back. Well, the 23 is in reference to chromosomes. There's 23 pairs of chromosomes. Your mom gave you half and your dad gave you half. So those two gametes came together, half from each parent, and they connected. So now imagine those two halves of the ladder connect again. So your mom gave you one half of it, your dad gave you the other half, and the two come together and form a zygote. That zygote was you. And then it grew into an embryo, and then it split and it split and it split, and 9 months later, wah, out you came. So it came from half from your mom, half from your dad, and that's how you became you. That's the genetic contribution. But that double helix is half came from your mom, half came from your dad. Imagine it visually as a really long ladder twisted like a piece of licorice.
Okay. So these double helixes, we know that it's inside of the cell, right? Is there more than one inside of a cell?
Yes.
Okay, so
every
there could be
cell.
multiple inside of each cell. And then how many cells are there in the body? Like
a bunch.
A
lot of zeros, a lot of commas, trillions.
A ton of them, okay, guys? And so you've got so much going on inside of your genes, and all of those genes combined together are considered your genome, right? Yep. So that's what makes up you. That's where
the DNA is inside your nucleus, and every cell has a nucleus. In fact, if you took every single cell, which are super, super small, you can't see them with the naked eye, they're microscopic. And you take the nucleus, inside the nucleus is where that strain of DNA is. If you take the nucleus and you unwind it, it's about 6 feet long in every cell. So imagine a 6 foot long, really, really, really tiny ladder twisted around like a piece of licorice. Every one of your cells has that in a ball inside the nucleus, and that's how it becomes you.
And it's so important that we're made up of a bunch of different cells that all have these double helixes inside of it, because cells go through a lot throughout your days, your months, your years of your life, right? And so if you only had one cell and it was getting bombarded all of the time, it can really lead to a pretty hard life, because you're going to be really damaged, right? Yeah. And so our cells actually replicate, and depending on what type of cell it is, it replicates quicker or takes longer than the others. But there's like a whole new you that's being produced constantly, which is a beautiful thing, because that means that any damage that's going on inside those cells from whatever you've done in your life, it can be gone and you can renew.
That's true.
I love it. I love it. So let's go ahead and let's move us into question number 3, if I can find my cursor here. There we go. And that is, what do your genetics tell you? Oh, you know what? This is a really good question. And what we want you to know is that you've got that beginning point with your genetics, right? That beginning point can be all obviously the visual traits that you have. Maybe you were born and you have a jaw line that looks more like your dad's than does your mom's. Maybe you have the eye color of your grandparents, but not your parents. That can happen too. You have the same hair color as your mom, but not your dad. Those are all physical traits that can be determined by your genes through your genetics, right? But what about psychological traits? What about your happiness level? What about your being an introvert or an extrovert? Could that have something to do with genes? Or even the being more positive than negative person? That can all be contributed to by your genes. Did you know that? It's not just how you look, but it's actually the emotions, the characteristics that come out naturally for you. Okay. So obviously genes don't account for all of the differences between people here on this planet, but research does indicate that it has a very good input point for how people turn out.
Well, let's talk about that. And when you're looking at, interesting thing about this, fun fact, if you will, is that every single person has about 99.2% of the exact same genes. Think about that. So, and those are the genes that make us human instead of, say, a frog or a crocodile. So the DNA, we all, about 99+% of all DNA we have in common as human beings, meaning we have eyes and we have ears and we have 10 fingers and 10 toes with slight variations, and 2 legs and 2 arms and a heart and lungs and
belly buttons,
all of those kinds of things. Yes. And so those are the things we all have in common. Less than 1%, or what are called alleles, is where we differ one from another. So we are about 99+% the same. It's less than 1% where they differ, or where we all differ, but that can be a pretty big difference in some people. So let's talk about one that's obvious, what are called somatotypes, or more specifically, your body types. Not everybody is 6'5" and very lean. There's people that are tall and lean. There's people that are mid-size and more muscular. And then there's people that are more shorter and rounder. Those are called somatotypes. Specifically, you have what's called an ectomorph. Ectomorph is the scientific term for somebody who's tall and lean. Very, very low fat, usually on the tall side, not much muscular. Then you have what's called a mesomorph. That's somebody who's muscular or athletic looking, average size, athletic looking, more muscles than the ectomorph. And then you have the endomorph. The endomorph tends to be shorter and rounder, muscular, and lots of body fat. So that's the typical. Now, can we change that? Yes, but that is an allele. That is a common tendency or heredity. So it's very infrequent are you going to see a family of mesomorphs that have an ectomorph offspring, or a family of endomorphs, heavy people, are going to have a tall, very lean person. That's where the mutations can come in, or adoption. You see those kinds of things.
Or checking into who the mailman is.
Yes, let's not go there. But yes, that's Because again,
It
it's
comes from
sexy
your mom
time
and your dad,
where
right?
you come from. So yes, that's a whole different topic and a whole other show in the future.
But my
But
input,
yes,
guys, I told you, I'm the one
keeping
that
it
brings the
real.
crazy.
You gotta keep it real.
I bring the
because
crazy.
Sometimes it isn't always what it appears.
No, and
yes.
and you know what? And I also, that's a really great lead into what I wanted to mention here.
Oh, now I'm afraid.
No, don't be afraid, because your genes can sometimes have an influence on maybe mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
It can have an input on, hereditary illnesses, illnesses that have happened from your parents, your grandparents, your grandparents and beyond, suffered with this specific thing. And many times people will think that, well, my parents had it, my grandparents had it, my great grandparents had it. And so it's in my genes, which means I'm going to have it too. And, one of the things that I want us to make sure that we stress here is that just because there's been something that's been passed on or has appeared to be part of your generations in the past, your parents, your grandparents, anybody, or great grandparents, or anybody beyond that, it does not mean that you are going to have that. Okay. Do not have it in your mindset that just because people in your family have had this illness or this problem, that you are going to have it.
True.
There was a time period there where it almost seemed like it was a trend that was happening, or maybe just a fad, to where with these same things that you're talking about here, the 23andMe or the Ancestry, being able to check out what your genetics looks like, they would go and they would have surgery done to actually remove body parts so that they would eliminate the potential of getting some sort of a disease or a sickness that their parents or grandparents or whatever had. Don't do that.
Well, let's talk about the evolution of that process,
Yes.
because it was based in fear. And a lot of times when things are based in fear, we have to take it back to, where does it come from? A lot of it is coming from ignorance, or we don't know enough information to actually have certainty about something. So when we don't have enough information, or we're not informed, we're ignorant about something, we can be fearful and take drastic measures. Yeah. So I remember like 20 years ago when we started understanding what genetic profiling is. And let me just put that in reference. Actually, it wasn't 20 years ago, because it wasn't until 2003, 18 years ago, when they completed what was called the Genome Project. So it's only been in the last 18 years that we truly understand the length of that ladder, if you remember the reference, and how many individual genes are on the DNA chain. It's about 20 to 25,000. So, and we mapped out every single one, but that wasn't completed until 2003. So it's been since then where we started to look at commonalities, traits, characteristics. Some of them are hardwired into us, and others are more malleable. And so when you're talking about somebody who says, well, my grandfather had cancer, my great-grandfather had cancer, my father has cancer, and therefore I may get cancer. Well, that's a generality, and it may or may not be true, but people even took it very specifically, that if my great-grandmother had breast cancer, my grandmother had breast cancer, my mother had breast cancer, and I'm a daughter in the family, I may have a tendency to have breast cancer too. And to Marcy's point, going out and having your breasts removed prophylactically or before, because when you're thinking about it, you can't get breast cancer if you don't have breasts. Right. That was the theory, or the thought process. And it was rooted in fear. It became very common. It became trendy, especially in Hollywood, because there was some influential, red carpet actors that did this kind of thing. Or having a hysterectomy if you have a series or a history of uterine cancer in your family. When you think about it from a common sense, practical standpoint, it doesn't make much sense. But because we're more educated now, when we weren't, when there was still ignorance prevalent and there was still fear prevalent, people made those drastic decisions. And thank God that we've learned more, we've understood more, we understand now more about what our topic of our next episode is going to be about, and how that becomes malleable, what we can change as far as our genetics are concerned.
Let's move us into question number 4 then, because question number 4 is, are you bound by your genetics, or can they be influenced? There's certain parts of your genes that you're kind of bound by. Like, let's talk about maybe how you look, your eye color, your hair color, and how tall you may become. Now, there are procedures that can be done to alter those, right? Like you can color your hair, and you could have implants done. If you have a smaller chest, I do not recommend you do that. For more information on that, go check out episode number 22, please. But there are ways to change or alter your body appearance. But on the inside, guess what, guys? Your DNA, your genes are still the same. They're still the same. Okay. But there are ways that you can actually influence.
Yes.
There are.
Significantly influence.
And that is so exciting because it's new. Most people don't understand this. People think that they are just being shackled and chained by what they were born into. And it's not the truth. You have a choice on some of these things.
And I mean, you're not going to, and it's funny. I was joking with my granddaughter last week when she was wondering where kids come from and how she became here. And, you know, we were walking in the park and she saw a lady that was pregnant, and it's like, she's going to have a puppy. And telling her, so when you're 4, she kind of looked at me a little awkwardly and really? And I'm like, no. But
No.
As a human being, if you are pregnant and you want a puppy, it's not going to come out of the belly of a human. It's just, that's because those are the kinds of things we cannot change. Human genetics are human genetics are human genetics when it comes to some things, and then other things are more malleable. So I mentioned this before, but this is where the blessing of research comes into play, where you can look at a certain population of people and you can look at their historical representation of what their DNA looked like, act like, performed like, and you can make subtle changes and watch the outcome difference. And it's interesting. So I'll let you talk, but I do want to share an example of identical twins and how when separated and taken into different environments,
on this next part,
they're different.
Yeah.
They're very different.
Yeah, because we're going to actually move into, there's 2 specific areas that we want to touch on, and how you can actually have some say and influence your genes and your DNA. Okay. So you don't have to live in fear. You don't have to be thinking that, oh my gosh, this happened to my mom, this happened to anybody in your past. It doesn't mean it's going to happen to you, and you can actually have a say in that. And so the 2 different areas that we're going to talk about, and it's actually going to cover the next 2 episodes, but epigenetics will be episode 26, and nutrigenomics will be episode number 27. And so basically what epigenetics is, it's the study of how the environment and other factors can change the way that genes are expressed. Yes. And this is the perfect place for you to share that story. I love this story.
So one of the things about the mid to late 80s that was positive about the AIDS virus, and I'm talking specifically about the AIDS virus or the HIV virus, was the body of research that it allowed us to gather when you look at how it affects human DNA, not just mortality. And when AIDS went into Africa in the 80s, and early and mid to late 80s, it affected a lot of people, killed lots and lots of people. And there were lots of children left behind from the parents who died from AIDS or the HIV virus. And a lot of them were identical twins. And when you have identical twins that are separated at birth or shortly thereafter because their parents died and now they're adopted out to families around the world, and there's wonderful organizations that facilitated this process, you can now see differences in them, not genetically, but epigenetically. And so identical twins, and keep in mind what we talked about meiosis, it's when sperm and egg come together to form one cell. And then that cell divides and becomes 2. And 4 and 8 and so on as a baby develops. But it can sometimes divide and become 2 babies instead of 1. That's what we call identical twins. Whereas fraternal twins, 2 sperm, 2 egg, 2 different babies. Identical twins started out as 1 cell. They split and became 2 individual babies with the exact same genetic footprint. Well, here's the interesting thing about it. When you take those children and you adopt them to different families with different habits, with different belief systems, different approaches to life, it can manifest in different physical attributes or characteristics. And then after decades, they come back now and study these kids that grew up very differently And not only do they look differently, in this case of this example of this one circumstance of this one case that I was looking at and remember researching and reading about, is they were brothers, and they were separated at about 2 months old and then reunited like 20 years later. And one of them, they were the same height, because again, they're the same genetically, but one of them was much heavier than the other, like about 80 pounds heavier. And the one that was heavier also had what looked like male pattern baldness, but it was premature baldness, because male pattern baldness is usually a genetic thing, and the other brother didn't have it. But oxidative stress, food stress, improper nutrition, and low physical exercise created one of the brothers that were identical looked very different than the other. They didn't even look related, let alone like identical twin brothers. And so that is the impact of epigenetics, or lifestyle, food choices, exercise choices, other types of things that put the body under stress that it doesn't really know how to deal with. It has to adapt to, which can have huge consequences. Now, they didn't have different eye color. They didn't have, one wasn't taller than the other. They were the same height, they were identical twins, but physical attributes, weight, and hair predominance, and also inside. One of them had pre-diabetes, high cholesterol, atherosclerosis, and all kinds of other things that the other one simply didn't have. And that's where we start to understand. And because of that research, we started to understand that genetics doesn't play as big of a role in human health as we thought it did. Again, back to the example I gave previously about grandfather, great-grandfather, father having a certain disease. Therefore, when I'm a boy in the family, I will probably get that too. Not so much, unless you have the same kind of lifestyle that allowed those types of things to develop in the first place. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I've got all this stuff running through my head that I want to say about epigenetics, but I'm gonna.
We have a whole episode on that coming.
Yes, I'm gonna save it for episode number 26, because we will be going in depth on epigenetics. And then what we're gonna cover on episode 27 is nutrigenomics. So let's read what nutrigenomics is. So nutrigenomics aims to identify the effects that the nutrients in your food or natural compounds have on the function and expression of the genes in your body. Okay, so epigenetics has to do with the environment around you, right? Choices you make there, what you're influenced by. And then nutrigenomics has to do with what you put in your mouth.
What goes in the pie hole, in other words.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. How did I know that he was going to say that? How did I know? Did you guys know he was going to say that? I'm sure that you did. If you've listened to any other episodes, you know that was going to happen. But guys, we are so excited. So we look forward to you guys all joining us on episode number 26, where we're going to be diving deeper into epigenetics and how you can actually make some positive influence on your own genome, your DNA, for a different outcome than what potentially you might have had without it. So knowledge is the foreplay to your wellness, right? So we're excited to be able to bring that to you. And always just keep in mind, guys, that you can connect with us at dondiandmarcy.com. Please go there to give us episode ideas, to ask about our biohacking regimen that we use every day, and any other requests for information, or if you just need prayer. We would love to be able to pray for you as well.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to say before we
just appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for the time you spend. We know it's valuable, and we truly appreciate it when you spend it with us. Hopefully this gave you some information. Tune in next episode when we talk about epigenetics, and we thank you so much. Share this out if you found value in it. Yes. God bless you all.